So today I'm going to be talking about the book of Ruth and how her being faithful and loyal and kind rewarded her. So I guess a quick prayer first. God, I pray that whoever's reading this receives the message that whenever we follow you and we are faithful and we live according to your word, that you will reward us. Amen. Okay, so Ruth is known as the faithful Moabite, which is because she chose to, after she faced serious tragedy whenever her husband passed away, she stayed with her mother-in-law, and there's a verse that says that she wants to be with Naomi, which is her mother-in-law. Your people will be my people, your God will be my God. This is actually one of the only times that God is actually mentioned in the book of Ruth, but it just shows that that first step that she took was being with Naomi and following her God. And then the vow that she makes to her shows loyalty, and she stays with her even though they're returning to where they came from. Ruth is leaving behind her family and everything to take care of Naomi. So she is choosing to follow what God put in her heart, to stay with Naomi and be faithful to her new family, and the rest of the story goes on to show how she is rewarded for that. So it shows an example of, after the tragedy of her husband's death, she could have just, returned to her family and tried to grieve and get over it, but she continued along that path and stayed with her mother-in-law to continue following what God had set out for her. And in chapter 2, we see God again leading her into the right field to meet her future husband, Boaz, spoiler alert, as she's going to take care of Naomi. So she's going to, fill the fields, to mend the crops, or, whatever they did back in those days. And of all the fields she could have chosen, God led her to this one field that ended up being where she met her new husband that would redeem her and Naomi. So this is really, again, showing how, just that simple choice to follow God, he continued to lead her onto the right paths. And, it doesn't say, well, God led her to this field, but we understand that because she made that choice to return to the town with Naomi, that God will continue to lead her in the right places to receive the blessings. And it's kind of interesting that they don't directly say that God's the one that led her there, because you can kind of make the connection for yourself that even whenever we think that something just happens by chance or a coincidence, that really and truly it's God leading us to even something that seems totally random that can be beneficial to us later on. So one verse that I want to hit on here is chapter 2, verse 12. Well, it starts in verse 11, and it said, Boaz is talking to Ruth in their first meeting and said, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by God, by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you may take refuge. So this is really interesting because this is Boaz, giving a blessing to Ruth, saying that God will reward her for what she has chosen to do for Naomi after her husband's death. So I think that's really interesting. That shows that, her kindness is what stood out to him, and what he had heard about her taking care of Naomi is what, kind of caught his eye. So I think that's really interesting that, it was her character that, made her stand out, and Boaz was, approached her and said, I've heard what you've done for your mother-in-law, and I hope God blesses you in return. So that was just a really interesting verse. And then it goes on to talk about, the rest of the story and how, the connection of Boaz being the redeemer of the family, but there's a closer relative. But then once again, whenever Ruth approaches Boaz to say, I would like you to marry me, to take care of me and Naomi, again, he compliments her because she didn't go run off with random young men after her husband passed away. She's continuing to do what's best for her family in, the legal way of who she should marry next and where she should go from there, which is why he is so willing. He's like, I will go talk to the person that is sort of in line before me and set this straight for you because of all of the right and kind decisions that you've made thus far. So that's basically the story of Ruth, and it's just really interesting because on the Bible Project's, review of the book of Ruth, it shows that it starts with the death of Ruth's husband and the loss, and the chapter ends with the birth of her and Boaz's son, which then the last few verses are the genealogy, which connects that story to David, which therefore connects it to Jesus. So that's just showing how, one little itty bitty, random thing of her picking that field, of her making the decision to stay with Naomi, though they seem little things in the time, all fit into God's bigger picture, which is to show that when stuff is God's will, he will make it happen, even if it's in the tiniest way, things we don't understand, how they're important or anything like that. He makes it happen, and he guides us the right way to do when it is in his will, and we are faithful and we trust him and we follow that path and are, kind people, being loyal to who he has put in our path to continue to support them and care for them. So I just thought that was really interesting. I had heard about Ruth being a big woman in the Bible, but I really took the past week to study and look into it and look at all the details of how interesting the story really was, and again, how God the entire time was behind the scenes, making everything happen for her because of her decision.